Okay, so I finished this project last night. Tonight, Friday, I believe it's supposed to be premiered on Eli's Twitch page. So by the time this commentary is out on YouTube, so should the original video. If you haven't seen it, I'll have a link to it in the description. I'd highly recommend you watch it before watching this, otherwise it's not going to make much sense. Moving on though, I'd like to go over some of the idiosyncrasies of this project. The first being that all the clips in this video were actually 720p DVR clips. Now, for any of you that are familiar with recording using Xbox DVR, you know the graphical fidelity is not that great, especially if it's 720p. So, I actually ran all the clips through DaVinci Resolve's Superscale feature and brought them up to 1080p, and especially combined with motion blur really helps sell a higher graphical fidelity. The second thing being that because I hate myself, I edited the vast majority of this project in beta software. You'll notice this says DaVinci Resolve 17 Public Beta. I accidentally backed up my database using the wrong version of Resolve, so I couldn't bring it back into Resolve 16. But with those out of the way, let's go over some of the VFX and the AFX of this project. Starting with the VFX, it's a very synesthetic edit, I suppose. Meaning that I tried to match as many of the visuals with what you're hearing as I could. And there's some very common themes throughout the video. The most prominent one probably being that it's glitchy. You know, it has a lot of like TV damage and digital damage and glitch type effects thrown on the clips, but there's some other commonalities. Starting with this transition, actually in the very beginning of the video. So this is a plugin that I basically made myself from scratch. It's designed to emulate the functionality of Universe Warp, which is a transition by Red Giant. And I can show you this actually in Fusion. So this is the expanded version of the node graph. And on the under the hood, it looks a little bit ugly because I've got some Lua expressions in here, which this is basically saying use an exponential ease curve regardless of the project frame rate or composition length. And then there's some parent-child expressions to this custom node, which I'm using as a set of global variables. So the reason this is important is because I use this effect numerous times throughout the video, and it means I didn't have to build it from scratch every time I wanted to do it. So it saved me a lot of time. Next, I'd say would be the angle style. So most of the angles in this video are very short and don't have a lot of motion. The main point I wanted to get across was just quick succession of showing your subject and then moving back to first person. And you'll see, like, let's say when I'm being the player camera, so to speak here, I'm just sitting still and then doing a dynamic zoom. And then here's a static angle, no zoom. Sitting here, just a little bit of zoom. So not much going on in terms of the actual angle work. It's just really showing what's going on in a way that keeps up with the pace of the music. And it's done like that a lot throughout the project. And the angles in this first clip are actually particularly important because you never get to see what really happens in first person. So this is the frame where the explosion actually happens. Well, there's a wall in the way. So I had to take my best guess based on the trajectory of this nade after the sticky launch. And my best guess is that he got stuck behind the rock. I don't know if it happened, but I think visually it makes sense. You can tell what's going on. And again, with the whole synesthetic type editing here, you can listen to the song and hear a sort of static sound. So in my mind, I thought, oh, why not do some like VHS type effect? So I used analog damage, I added a flicker to it, and some small camera shake to give it a little bit of a wobble. You can mostly see it in the edges of the screen as it plays. And the first transition in the clip is kind of weird and wacky. Again, just to go with the weird and wackiness of the song. I will say, this is the weirdest song I've ever edited to. I also didn't pick the soundtrack. This was the music that ReziLienT wanted to use for his video. The next common theme I wanted to go over is the temporal blur, which I guess is one of the upsides to me having edited this in Resolve 17, because they added a new effect called motion trails, which is literally like a temporal blur. And anytime there is a sustain or a reverb, then I'll visually accommodate it with a temporal blur. So if you pay attention here, that little sustain on the bell tone, and the higher pitch of it made me think of giving it a glow as well. So and this syncing style is something I actually wish I'd see from more people that edit Halo 2. So these double shots, it's all the exact same thing. 4 shots in a row. So how do you spice it up? Well, the first 2 shots, I actually sync the first bullet with the downbeat. The second 2 shots, the last bullet is on the downbeat. So let me play it and you'll get the gist of it. Right? Those are the downbeats. Whereas here, it kind of leads into the downbeat. So put together, I don't know. I feel like that adds a little bit more variety to how the audio is portrayed. Another synesthetic component. So this glissando here in the song, the pitch down, I kind of imagine taking the color away from the video. So here I add an adjustment clip that keyframes in some lack of saturation. And I wanted it to pop back into place on one of the downbeats here. So that's where it like snaps the color back into place. This little ratchety effect to kind of match with the, it's New Blue RGB Shift is the name of the effect, but it just adds some shaky chromatic aberration. And here you can see again that theme of reverb and temporal blur. And here's that transition again I mentioned from the very beginning. The only difference is that there's no zoom scaling, but it's the same macro. And here's one of the other themes. It's not an actual glitch effect, but I feel that the Sapphire Jitter Frame effect, which just scrambles your frames a bit, goes well with the glitchy type sound. So here on these like ratchety percussive hits, I use the Sapphire Jitter and temporal blur to kind of sell the effect, I guess. Here's one of the other common themes. So anytime I do time remapping to speed up a clip instead of trimming a clip, so here, for example, it's about 800% speed up between these 2 sections, I'll use a zoom blur to really add to the speed aspect of it. So here's with a zoom blur and here's without. Big difference on, you know, how fast it looks. And that way you don't have to rely on the sensitivity of your motion blur to demonstrate motion. And this section right here has a lot of glitchy sounds, so I use a lot of glitchy visuals, just kind of natural. So here's that spin zoom macro that I was talking about. Kind of going from first to third person. And then, let's see, here's BCC video glitch, BCC TV damage, BCC video glitch. On this metal right here, this is Sapphire digital damage, BCC TV damage, BCC video glitch, Sapphire jitter frame. So yeah, lots of glitchiness because the song just sounds really glitchy here. I'll let it play through. Going back to this right here though. So this was a 3D camera track, and the reason I have this metal here is because you may have noticed this is a splatter clip. That's kind of the whole purpose of the clip being here. but there's not much time to linger on it. And not because I couldn't have edited it that way, but if I did, I felt like it would have lingered longer than it had to, because it is just a single kill. So here, there's just a little lead up. It's like, oh, here's the guy existing, you know, and then here's the splatter. And then we're going to transition out of the clip. So there's the dead body. And here's the weird thing. So Silly Goose's sound pack has some images, but only for Halo 3. I take that back. He might have Halo Reach stuff, but he doesn't have stuff for Halo 2. And the splatter metal in Halo 2, right here, is the same almost as the Wheelman metal from Halo 3. So this is actually the Wheelman metal, but I took out the text that says Roadkill Tires in my photo editor and then brought it back in. And then I projected it onto an image plane in 3D and did a camera track, added some glitch, did some color compositing so it looked more natural. The one thing I don't like is that the graphical style of this picture is just so different from Halo 2 itself that I couldn't get it to blend the way I really wanted it to. So instead, I just brought it a bit more towards orange, brought down the saturation and lowered the brightness a bit. So at least the lighting is in the direction. So the sun comes this way and then there's some glare on the side. So it kind of works out. Otherwise, I would have had to flip the image and make it work that way. But yeah, in line with the glitch theme, then I make it glitch out as we're fading away. If you want to see the camera track, here's our virtual camera moving backwards. There's a little cave reformed with point cloud. And here's our image just outside of the cave entrance. This is another pretty common theme too. So there's nothing complex about this. This is literally just edge detect. And the color grade itself is already pretty bright. So my accenting effect, I decided to make dark. Because you can accent things by making them much brighter or much darker than they already are. Luminance changes are very noticeable to the human eye. So I chose dark because if I made it brighter, it would blow out the highlights really badly and it just wouldn't work out. But there are common points where you hear like a strange sound or, you know, a percussive hit like that. And I just accent it with the edge detect to make it very dark and fade back into normalization. This effect right here, I pretty much did it just because I wanted to put something into practice. So there's a concept that I was toying around with a couple months back of isolating effects as a layer. So for example, if you have an effect and let's say it's particles, well, you could just put particles on an adjustment layer and then you're good to go, right? Those are referred to as like a generator where it doesn't need any sort of a background to exist. However, if you have just a solid black solid and you put radial blur on it, it doesn't do anything, right? Because solid black blurred is still solid black. So how do you isolate something like a radial blur? You can't just put it on a layer like alone. You could put it on a clip, but then any effect will apply to both the clip and the effect. So there's this cool thing in Fusion that lets me take a difference composite. And what that means is if I have my image merged into essentially a copy of itself and a copy with the effect, what's the difference between a clip and a clip that has an effect? The effect itself. If you take a difference apply mode, the only thing left is the radial blur itself. So then I applied an edge detect to it to get this look. It was just me kind of toying around with an idea I had a while back, and I wanted to use it in a video, essentially. But later in this composition, there's also this little arrow animation. And this was a lot more tedious than it should have been because in the first build of the Resolve 17 beta, I have this paint node here. And normally if you use a stroke to draw it, you can do a write-on animation and that lets you just keyframe the length of it and all that. Well, it was glitched, so I had to draw it by hand and then I had to mask it and then offset them both with the planar transform to make it look the way I don't know. It was just kind of annoying. But other than that, I gave it some of that wiggly animated type look with some fast noise and a displacement node. So this is the noise pattern used to drive it. And then just kind of shrink it back into place. And then once we go to the end of the clip here, I just add some lens distortion to match the weirdness of the song. And then some edge glow from Sapphire to really accent the last shot. So there's a song change here. You can hear it, like it's all glitchy and stuff here. And then here it's all, it's a totally different style. So I wanted to change the style of my color grade as well, because color is a huge way of representing visually your theme. So again, if I'm trying to match visuals with audio, I should change my color grade to match the audio as well. So in this case, I wanted to make it more glowy and softer, because that's how I would describe the sound of the song. I kind of did that by leading with this effect around the hand. So first, the arm comes up and it has this glow, right? And then your eye is drawn to this part of the screen. When it transitions, your eye is led over here, again, to this person in the next clip. And then everything else is already glowed by then. And then that just kind of works out throughout this clip. This next clip is basically just the change in color grade and then the time remap zoom blurs for the most part. There's some audio work that I'll explain when I get to the AFX section, but we're not there yet. And here, funnily enough, the paint animation I was talking about before, they fixed it in, I think, the next build of Resolve 17 beta. So this time I was able to draw a normal paint spline and just animate it, motion track it. You know, you've seen me do this before. I think I did it in Dichotomy, but yeah, nothing new here. But I just wanted to do something on the screen that moved faster than the rest because the beginning of this clip is slowed down. And I did that to cut the other missed shot here. I didn't want to just have a missed shot starting the clip. So it's just something to catch the viewer's eye while the rest of the clip is slow motion. So again, here comes the sustain audio matched with temporal blur. And this worked out better than I expected it to originally. So when you start hearing all those synth sounds becoming very legato, that's when I added the temporal blur. And at first, I wanted to retain visual accuracy in the middle of the screen, so I only applied the temporal blur to the outside of the scope. But when he zooms out, I noticed that if I just feathered it, it still looks pretty decent, and it just kind of gives it that hazy look. Okay, so on here, I originally didn't have this fusion composition. So you need headphones to hear this, but if you notice, there's like a bass tone. You hear that? So there was nothing visually accommodating that, so I just added a very slightly opaque fast noise that just gave you something to sort of look at while that bass tone hit. And then it transitions using my macro, a combination of keyframed red toning and new blue RGB split. And here's going to be another temporal blur. So this was matched by the reverb audio on the extermination. But you'll see another instance of this technique, but I just go into Project Cartographer. I get a green screen clip of me putting my weapon away, and then I chroma key it and I put it in place so it looks like you're just kind of swooping around the map basically. You know, and at full speed you don't really notice the difference. Like here this looks relatively smooth, but in reality if you look at it, the angle is pretty smooth, but the jolt between the BR is quite noticeable when slowed down. So this transition, full disclosure, I didn't do anything to make this transition. This is a new preset that they just threw into Resolve 17. I was like, hey, that kind of looks the way the song sounds, so I just went with it. And then here we got some more glitch stuff. I guess this is a semi-common theme as well. The Sapphire Chroma Distort. That's this like warpy, rainbowy look. But I also gave it some graininess with Sapphire Diffuse. And then I blew out the purple in the explosion to give it a very animated type look. Again, got another sustain in the bell tone, so. Okay, so this is a combination of Sapphire Pixel Sort and Sapphire Digital Damage for extra glitchiness. Obviously, I kept this outside of the scope so that you could actually see what's going on. And after that, I did another eye leading type animation. So after the shot, he looks to the right. So naturally, you're just going to be looking towards the middle of your screen, right? So you're probably looking about here. So Sapphire 14 came out during this project, and I used one of their new effects called Ultra Zap. And all I did was motion track the starting point and the needler, and then I animated it towards the end point where he's going to be looking. I masked it behind the sniper, but thankfully I was able to motion track most of the masking. I've gotten very lazy with masking since using Resolve because I can usually qualify things instead, but that's supposed to draw your eye over to the next subject, which is this guy that gets destroyed over here. This one's just another Sapphire Chroma Distort. I just assigned it to the upper luminance values of the sky, so it doesn't obstruct the darker portions of the image, which is where your main subject is. This was another type of isolation effect. So if we go into Fusion, all I did was take a copy of the original clip. So here it's just going media in, merge media out, so that's nothing. And then I take a Luma key. So the brightest thing on the map is actually the lift. So that's the only thing that stays based on the threshold I set. And then I give it some waviness to like wiggle it. And then I color correct it to make it stand out more. Because if I left it at blue, you probably wouldn't notice it as much. And then I added a flicker just to match the tempo of that. I don't even know what you would call this sound. But, you know, it matches. You get the point. So here, here's another static angle where I'm talking about just having a dynamic zoom on it. I do some very, very, very basic depth of field on here. In some of these static angles, because they're static, I don't have to motion track or mask anything. I could just, well, I guess I do mask it, but I just put some lens blur on the closest point in the focal range. But I don't do anything in the background because then as he moves, I might have to mask him, and I don't feel like doing that. So, but here, this effect, you might not have even noticed it, but I was kind of tossed up on this because if I made it too strong, it would have looked really bad. But if it's too subtle, you wouldn't notice it. I think I made it too subtle. where half of the screen flips with each shot with a tilt blur. So you can see it like flip between shots and all that. Another sapphire chroma distort there. This is actually optical flow right here. This is about 1/4 speed. It says half, but I forced Resolve to interpret this clip, which is 4K 60 FPS, as a 30 FPS clip. So, you know, there's like no artifacting at all. I'm pretty happy with how this optical flow turned out. Yeah, you can see some very slight deformation in the barrel of the sniper caused by the motion prediction here. But that's literally it. You can see some of it on the stock of the sniper as well. On that frame. It's very small though. Oh. Well, why are you doing that? Okay. Like I said, this is beta software. So, oh boy. Well, I don't have anything to talk about on this angle anyway, I don't think. Some people might not have noticed the purpose of this effect. It probably seemed quite random, actually, without additional context. But you'll notice this effect on here. It's tied to the luminance values. So anything with light on it, essentially, will shimmer. So I did that in Fusion. And then I just kind of flip it with a vortex modifier. But you don't really have enough time to see that shimmering was added to the video. So it just randomly seems to show up, I think. So I probably should have handled that better. Then here's a pretty standard doorway masking transition. Here I just said fuck it. With this transparency, there's 2 frames. I'm not going to try and deal with partial transparency masking to reveal the background layer, because real time it looks fine. This was a triple planar track, but one of the things I wanted to focus on was introducing each text component in a different way. So the first one kind of blurs into shape. The second one pops into place, kind of with that bell tone. And then the third one is a very soft, like a resolution in the song. So I wanted to add like a very feathered glow. And then just the Halo is Back outro with some time remapping with optical flow, and then a hue shift that's animated over time. So that's it for all the VFX side of things. There's a lot of AFX in this video, actually. So you may have noticed that the audio track that contains the song is called Voice Remove. The very first second has a trailing voice at the beginning. You don't hear it because I removed it though. And I was going to remove all the vocals from the song, but I decided to just leave it in. It would have been more of a hassle than I needed. But there are some other removals that I did. So for example, this Gemini clip, if you listen carefully, all the beam rifle shots sound normal except the last one. There's no double click. So those clicks I removed because if you listen to the song, there's absolutely no percussion. So having those transients in there just sound really out of place. I didn't like it. So what I was able to do is go into, here's the original copy of the file, actually. You can hear that, it's just they're out of place. So if I bounce this into Fairlight, I can open this with an external audio program. I use RX8 by Isotope. It's a spectrogram audio editor, which I think I've talked about one of these before. in one of my other director's commentaries. But before, it was a software called Spectral Layers by Steinberg. But it's the same concept. So here, brightness demonstrates amplitude, frequency is represented vertically, and time is represented left to right. So you can actually see the transients that I'm talking about. This right here, I already know this is the click. Pretty obvious. Here's the other one. But you can remove them quite easily. So if I attenuate it horizontally, this will average it with the area around it and remove that transient so it sounds like a smooth piece of audio. You hear that? No clicks. So I do that a couple times throughout the video. I don't remember all the other instances, but that's the one that just comes to mind because it's really the end of the phrase in that piece of music. But as for all the other audio effects, what I'm going to do is play through the video and just put annotations on the screen explaining the audio effects that are done. And then I'll come back when that's finished.
Double kill. Triple kill. Double kill. Triple kill. Tag. Double kill. Triple kill. Double kill. Triple kill. Kill frenzy. Kill atrocity. Kilimanjaro. Double kill. Double kill. Triple kill. Kill-tacular. Kill frenzy. Kill atrocity. Kilimanjaro. Double kill. Triple kill. Kill-tacular. Kill frenzy. Kill atrocity. Kilimanjaro. Double kill. Triple kill. Kill-tacular. Extermination. Double kill. Triple kill. Kill-tacular. Kill frenzy. Kill atrocity. Kilimanjaro. 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 Double kill. Triple kill. Double kill. Triple kill. Kill-tacular. Kill frenzy. Double kill. Triple kill. Kill-tacular. Kill frenzy. Kill atrocity. Kilimanjaro. Double kill. Triple kill. Kill frenzy. Double kill. Triple kill. Kill frenzy.
So that's that. One thing I did also want to mention, specifically with some of the pitch adjustments, is why I do it the way I do. And really that's because when I'm doing manual game audio, I try and view the audio being added as part of the music. So essentially adding a new instrument to the song. So if you listen to the BR audio in this section,
Double kill. Triple kill.
so here like it's staggering on pitches, and listen to the song here. Let me mute the BR actually. So every other beat is actually lowering the tone in the instrumentation. So I'm trying to emulate that with the BR audio. I actually view most of the gun audio as like a timpani. If you don't know what a timpani is, it's a pitched drum that only has two tones. Usually it has one pitch at the first note in a scale, and the other one is going to be the fifth note in a scale. So depending on what matching key signature is taking place or even chord progression in the music at that time, you would play whichever note has harmony with those pitches. So I kind of view the gun audio in the same way, because in Silly Goose's sound pack, he has 5 of every weapon, and the first and the fifth of those audios are the most far apart in terms of pitch. So if you want to add the most variety, you want to have those two on hand at any point in time. And really being able to distinguish your pitches between them makes them sound much more various. And if you can match them with the pitch of your music, it just makes more sense. You're going to see a jump cut in the recording here, because something I also wanted to show is that I decided to normalize this project to YouTube's loudness standards. So in my project settings, I actually have it set to the recommendation, which is -14 LUFS. And they suggest having it between 0 to -2. So I'm at just under 0. So that means that it doesn't have to renormalize my audio when it's actually put on YouTube. So that means I've tried to keep it as professional as I can and actually accommodate for the delivery platform, in this case being YouTube, which I hadn't really bothered to do with a project before, but it's something that I really recommend people look into to prevent their audio from clipping and getting readjusted once it goes through the YouTube transcode process. It'll just sound more like your actual render, basically. But the last thing I wanted to go over is something that you can't see in this project preview, which is the motion blur. The past few projects, I've been using the native motion blur in Resolve's color page, which I can process in real time. That's not an issue. However, I wanted to use RSMB without actually having the RSMB plugin. So in Resolve, you can actually build RSMB, the plugin, from scratch. So if I open this in a new timeline here, and let's go to a frame that has some motion blur, like right here. So the way RSMB, the plugin, actually works is it takes your motion vectors and then it applies directional blur in relation to those motion vectors. So the way you do this in Fusion is add an optical flow node, which collects your motion vector data. If you want to visualize it, there is a node for that. So these lines show the direction of motion where it's calculating the optical flow, right? And then there's another node here for vector motion blur. And now it's applying motion blur based on those vectors. So I used a proxy for processing at half resolution. And I think the amount I used was 0.25. There we go. So here's with and without motion blur. You can see it doesn't really like muddy the image in areas that don't move. And I didn't even have to mask out my reticle or any HUD components. It just looks good as is. And I was lucky enough to get it to work right on the first pass, because this process is very slowly, just like real RSMB. It's a very computationally intensive process. But yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there, that the video may look like it has RSMB, but it actually doesn't, because you can build it from scratch in Fusion. Aside from that, though, I think that's the end of the video. I'm not going to be doing a whole lot more of these unless you guys request it, because for the most part, I'm just about done editing montages. I have one project that's still due at the end of the year for the Halo is Back contest. And then I have another video for Cheesecake, his Halo Reach Montage 4. And it's going to be a background process while I work on my other jobs. So that might take 6 months to a year to complete. I don't know if I'm actually going to get around to editing my own gameplay in any reasonable time frame. So if you guys want me to go over some of my old videos, I can maybe do that and do director's commentaries on them if I remember anything. But other than that, leave your comments if that's what you want. And that'll be it for this video.